From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi again. Welcome to Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. So have you been down to Millennium Park at least once in the last 10 years? The chances are you have, maybe splashed in the Crown Fountain, mugged for the bean, watched a concert under the stars. Well, it's been 10 years. It's 10 years old this week, and I can't help but wonder what's going through Rich Daley's mind right now. Those of us who were around back then, we know how much he loved that project. He looked into the early plans and he said they weren't grand enough, and then he called in all the businesses and said they had to step up and put some money on the table. He assigned some amazingly creative people to that job, and they came up with something stunning. Expensive, yes, over budget, well, of course, but stunning. And on that summer night in 2004, when he and Maggie were up on the Pritzker stage taking their bows before the whole big audience, it was probably inconceivable to him that he wouldn't be right back there a decade later lapping up the gratitude of all of us people in the admiring public. But instead, he's nowhere to be found. He's begging the courts not to order him to testify publicly about the hinky deals he put together for his buddies to open money-printing restaurant. And his tactic is to claim he can't remember anything about those meetings, the meetings where he selected the trees, reviewed the drawings, even decided where the bar should be in the park grill. So I gotta wonder, sometime on some early morning, have the security folks ever seen a guy wandering around, fedora pulled over his eyes, probably in a business suit, sitting alone on a bench in the Lurie Garden? Well, let me tell you, it was probably just an old politician from a long time ago trying to jog his memories. On the program today, probably nothing at all about Millennium Park. There's nothing to talk about. In fact, the big political news this week was that Toni Preckwinkle's announcement that she's got a lot more work to do over at the county, and she's just really too busy to take on Rahm Emanuel right now, but thank you very much for asking. So that opens this intriguing possibility. In just a few short months, Mayor Karen Lewis could be meeting with Governor Bruce Rauner about her plans to tax rich people to help pay for public education. So here to talk about politics and the week's news and a lot of other things are two of my favorite reporters in Chicago. Natalie Moore is here from WBEZ, Bureau Chief of the South Side Bureau. Glad to have you again, Natalie. Thanks for being back. And Mick Dumke. Mick Dumke from the Chicago Reader and half of the First Tuesday show, my favorite show, over at the Hideout, where they talk about politics in front of a screaming audience. It's kind of a weird concept.
Not an adulation, by the way, usually
right,
heckling.
Right. So we have to start by talking about the mayoral scene. None of us can know why Toni Preckwinkle decided she didn't want to do it. But I mean, $22 million could be a good part of it. You just wrote a piece yesterday, Mick, about the funding, our mayor's public position on one side that he won't take any money from anybody who does business with the city, except that that's quotes, doing business with the city is how you define doing business with the city, right?
That's right. Yeah, we took a look at some of his big money donors and some of the people he works most closely with. I mean, it's no secret at this point in time that the mayor, a lot of his close friends and closest allies, biggest supporters, the people who recently, when his affiliated PAC was formed, came up with $1 million. Just 8 people came up with $1 million in a week. And then as a little follow-up effort, they took a few days off and they came back, and 6 more of them came up with $325,000 in just one day. So we know that this guy has a fundraising juggernaut every time he kind of switches, flips the switch. But Ben Jarofsky and I took a close look at it, and yeah, a lot of these folks do have business ties to the city in one way or another. They may not be getting contracts per se, but they're sitting on the board of banks that get bond work worth millions of dollars. They do business with people who do business with the city. Maybe their lobbyist isn't allowed to contribute, but they contribute instead of their lobbyist. It's just lots of ends around, and the bottom line is, you're right, Ken, to your first point, the guy can raise a lot of money, and money isn't everything in politics, but it does count for a lot. And I think in this case, Toni Preckwinkle would not have needed as much money as Rahm Emanuel, just because she has a broad base of support, and if we're believing any of the many polls that have come out, she has got a lot of popularity. But that said, you need to get money from someplace, and you'd have to sort of cross all these business people, these very powerful interests. And I actually think that is the biggest issue with the fundraising, is not just the dollars and cents, but who it is that you have to sort of defy.
The interconnection.
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's this whole network of very powerful, very wealthy people who have made it clear that they want Rahm Emanuel to remain as mayor. And so you have to kind of step on all their toes and say, to hell with all of you, I'm taking him on, and then potentially divide the Democratic Party and so on. So I think, from what I can tell, that is the biggest reason why she said no thanks.
Yeah. Of course, that now puts us in the position where all eyes turn to Karen Lewis. And I saw that Eric Zorn this morning had, I can't remember what his source was for it, but he had a list from what essentially the Rahm Emanuel camp will be asking Karen Lewis if she ever decides to run for mayor, the 10 questions that they believe she won't be able to answer, like exactly what's your legislative strategy for this LaSalle Street tax that you think you're going to be able to get through, and stuff like that. At this point, you're Karen Lewis. What do you do? Do you go for this?
I don't know. I think that she's probably right now just riding out on this wave of popularity that she has among certain sectors. With Toni Preckwinkle, I've never interviewed her about possibly running for mayor, but I think that people look to her because they saw her as the only person who could possibly beat Rahm. But I think a lot of it was media speculation, and I think Mick can weigh in on this. Like, I don't know if she ever said anything that really signaled that she was looking to be mayor, whether it was an exploratory committee, did she do any kind of PAC? And I think she just got tired also of people asking her all the time, are you going to run? But I never had any sense that this was something that she was really looking into. But none of us are in our head, but I could be missing something.
I think that's a very good point, because I think that she got to where she was by just kind of speaking frankly about a lot of issues that bugged her. Disproportionate minority representation in incarceration, the education, the complete mess that Chicago Public Schools is, and that her feeling was that Rahm Emanuel wasn't doing anything to improve it. That kind of drew attention, but maybe when she actually sat down and looked at the numbers and the absolute humiliation that you're going to have to go through to try to get this job.
And I also think that we can't underplay how important the county board position is.
I agree.
Is it more? There's always debate. Which is more powerful, being the mayor or Cook County Board president. And I do think that her work is very important in this time that we're in about incarceration and who's being locked up. So when she says there's a lot of work to be done, could that be subterfuge for why she's not running? But there really are some issues that can make an impact. And as far as Karen Lewis is concerned, I wouldn't be surprised if she sits down and weighs all the options and decides that this probably isn't the best route for her. But I think that the attention she is basking in right now, and has some political capital that she can use in ways that aren't just running for mayor.
See, I think that's it. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'll come back to Karen Lewis in a second, but I got to disagree a little bit. There's no doubt that being mayor is more powerful than being county board president. Being mayor of Chicago is arguably more powerful than being governor of Illinois. I mean, at least that's the way it's perceived. And I don't believe for 1 minute that I've never met a Chicago politician, an elected official, who hasn't daydreamed about sitting on the 5th floor of City Hall.
And it's not just politicians.
That's right, exactly. Like, everybody at one level who gets in this game wants the job. And I'm quite certain that Toni Preckwinkle was thinking it over. Now, has she always had her eye on the mayor's office? I'm not sure about that. And I think you guys are exactly right. She's very passionate about criminal justice reform, and let's give her credit. I don't think that's just a bunch of political BS.
No,
she does want to keep working on that. I mean, she almost single-handedly has managed to make, the release of defendants from Cook County Jail like a popular issue. I mean, that's like was a third rail issue for a long time, and so let's give her credit for all that. But whether it was because it dawned on her that she could actually be mayor, or because there was a furious lobbying effort, and it became clear to her that people wanted her to. She was being recruited. This is your responsibility. Someone has to take him on. You can do it. I suspect it was some combination of those things, but she was definitely thinking about it. Fran Spielman in the Sun-Times this morning actually reported that they were close to hiring a campaign manager, or they were searching for a campaign manager for an exploratory committee. So I think this was a very real possibility. But you're right that she's so cautious. Anybody who's watched her, she was alderman for 20 years. She ran 3 times before she got elected alderman. She's not somebody who's just very quickly going to say in the heat of the moment, there's a better thing over here, I'm going to go over there.
So what do you think Rahm told her in that secret back meeting that convinced her not to run?
That's a good question. We all would love to have been a fly on the wall there. I mean, publicly, of course, Rahm, it was very interesting a few weeks ago how he started saying, well, she's promised me that she isn't going to run. And so, his effort, in my view, to kind of paint her in a corner so that then if she did run, she's being deceitful in some way, she's breaking a promise, which in the greater scheme of things is probably not that big of a deal politically, but that was kind of what he did. And then, that didn't seem to work. When politicians refuse to rule something out, when they keep the door open, there's a reason for that. And
but I also think she was just kind of messing with the media a little bit.
I don't know.
I just wonder if she took some joy. I mean, every press conference where she's being asked this and she says the same thing, I just wonder if it kind of tickled her inside to have this question over and over, and she answers it the same. Like, she's not changing from that, and the speculation just kept going.
When she appeared on My Chicago with your colleague Odette Youssef and no, it was with Mark Baser, right? I can't remember. Anyway, they were riding around in the car, and he said something about how do you get along with Rahm Emanuel, and there's like this 6.5 second silence, and it's like, she was enjoying that. She was enjoying saying things without saying it.
But enjoying it to him
but,
also.
I think you're right. I mean, look, and I respect Toni Preckwinkle. She's got an ego, of course. Everybody who's wants to be in the public eye. It's part public service, and there's an ego component too. So absolutely, was she soaking it up? I'm sure she enjoyed it on some level. But you know what? The last press conference I was at where this was a major subject, it was after her City Club speech a couple weeks ago. It was just a barrage of questions. Well, are you going to run, or are you ruling yourself out? And she looked stressed out, and she got irritable, and she got really sarcastic, almost Rahm-like, and in a way that you don't necessarily hear from Toni. And so someone's like, well, why, you should just, one of the reporters says, you should just tell us definitively if you're in or you're out. And she's like, well, thank you for that advice. And so it really struck me, like, actually at that moment, I got the feeling, she doesn't really like this. She's trying to talk about something else.
I think you're absolutely onto something there. And I have said that on the show here several times, that it's not a perfect comparison, but there is a little bit of the Hillary Clinton effect here, that these are people that the electorate loves to love until they actually see them out there on the campaign hustings, and they find that they can be pretty short, and they can be kind of a little bit hissy, and they're not as likable as you think, because Toni Preckwinkle has strong opinions about things, and she's not about to just be all warm and fuzzy for you.
Yeah, she's a human being. I mean, you sit there and take that kind of beating over and over again, even though, yes, you willingly step into the spotlight and stuff. You guys still, there was just a part of me that was like, sure, I'm like, answer the question. But there's another part of me that's like, this is, I can understand.
All right, so I just, in the interest of keeping things moving along, just Karen Lewis, I mean, we've avoided talking about Karen Lewis here. Does she benefit? What am I trying to say? If Karen Lewis decides to run and just gets slaughtered, does she still win politically? Does it still help her?
Well, it depends on the type of campaign she runs. I don't know. I mean, look, most people are not expecting her to win. I mean, the poll that came out this week in the Sun-Times showed her with a slight lead over Mayor Emanuel. That's what the Emanuel campaign said. It's laughable. I don't know if I'd call it laughable when a sitting incumbent, even candidates with a very low profile, alderman who's been was a machine politician, been out of office for 10 or 15 years, still gets 30% of the vote against him. There are a lot of people out there saying anybody but, the mayor.
Right.
So that is potentially a problem. But most people don't believe she's electable. So I think actually she's in a pretty good spot, because I think she could, even by making a modest showing, I think she could impress a lot of people. And the other thing is, you guys, she's always described as fiery, and people are always like, she's angry all the time. That's actually not true.
It's not true at all. Right.
If you hear her speak, and if the clips that are put on television are more than just her getting ticked off, which does happen, but she's really articulate. She's really smart. I think she would actually impress a lot of people.
I have to say that I have a sort of an opposite opinion there. So what I just said about Toni Preckwinkle, who I respect greatly, but Karen Lewis has that ability to just sort of humiliate you with a smile and just a kind of a joking attitude. And as someone who loves politics the way a lot of people love sports, I mean, that would be the Super Bowl. Could you just imagine?
That the media would have to be very careful, because there are automatic tropes that each of them fall into.
Yes.
And this could be a battle in personalities.
Right.
And not about.
Oh yeah.
Not about the substance.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
And if that does happen, I think reporters would start foaming at the mouth. But I would just caution being careful, because the way we do, and even national media sometimes outside of maybe leftist publications, Karen Lewis is painted. I mean, you look at. There are lots of problems with the CNN documentary mockument.
That's fine.
Reality show.
Chicagoland.
And whenever they showed her, if you just see someone calling someone the murder mayor, that is going to be a turnoff and seen as hyperbole. Right. And what does she really stand for? But that does tend to be what's recycled about her, and not how she stands on issues. So if this does happen, my worry is that it would devolve into a battle of wits and not about policy.
And really lousy commercials, really rotten, really nasty commercials. But I maybe a two-word answer to this. We talked about this with Toni Preckwinkle. Could Karen Lewis raise any money at all? Who would give her money other than, she'd get some union money, but no business person is going to give her money, right? No charter school supporter is going to give her money.
No, she's probably going to lose the hedge fund vote. That's true. I don't think she needs that, and she needs some money, but she doesn't need as much as other people need, because she's got an automatic. Not that every single teacher, of course, is going to be behind her campaign, but a lot are going to be.
I think they have positive feelings.
Yeah, and other unions as well. So I think she's already got a grassroots game that the mayor needs money to buy. The mayor actually does not have a ground political game.
Yeah.
He's a new politician that's money. So.
We as you know, dear viewer, we have the standing offer of $100 cash for the first person who can come up with an audio recording of that telephone meeting between Axelrod Daley and Rahm when they set the whole deal up for Rahm to replace Daley. We still don't have that tape, but I know we'll get it sooner or later. And now we'll add to that the meeting between Rahm and Preckwinkle. We'd love to hear that tape.
Oh,
yeah. There was a reason why I invited you guys to this table today, and it had nothing to do with this. I wanted to talk to you about the reaction to this just god-awful weekend, the July 4th weekend, with just lots of mayhem in some parts of the city, and talk to you as journalists. And unfortunately, we've done the usual thing. We've blown off 20 of our 30 minutes already, so what was supposed to be a half-hour conversation, we got to cram it into 9 minutes
just have
if we
us back
can.
next week.
That's
Okay,
right,
fine.
yeah.
Well, if you'll do it, we'll set it up right now. We'll come back. How should we cover violence in Chicago? I just don't know. It's an open-ended question. And could we deal with the question of, I'm just going to throw these questions on the table and then I'm going to shut up. We we have talked so often about the issue of whether or not we have enough police on the streets. Rahm Emanuel promised 1,000 cops. He didn't deliver it. If those 1,000 cops had been available on the July 4th weekend, would it have made a difference? Was that a factor? Was staffing a factor? The things that the mayor has been saying and others have been saying, that the real issue here is just the decline of morals and values, that if only these people had values, this wouldn't happen. And the ongoing question about mandatory minimums. I was at McCarthy's press conference on Monday, and he once again just hammers that this is the real problem, is that the wrong guys are in prison. We got to put the gun offenders in prison, and then we're going to be better off.
Go ahead, Natalie.
Let's
Discuss. Wrap that right up.
Yeah, let's see in the next 10 minutes. For starters, I think that the mayor and the police chief get too much credit and take too much heat when there's violence. I don't think that these are policing issues. This is an issue of economics. It's an issue of poverty. It's an issue of segregation.
And disinvestment.
Yes, I believe that the way the media covers violence in this city is completely wrong. I am so sick of the Monday morning count. There's no empathy. It turns into this, oh God, Chicago, what's wrong with you? What's going on there? And then it becomes this national story. I think once Barack Obama leaves office, we may see a decline in some of this kind of coverage and, Monday morning quarterbacking, or not even Monday morning, the next morning. The number one violence issue in this city isn't even gun violence, it's domestic violence.
Yeah.
If you are listening to a police scanner, so we make decisions about what kind of violence to cover.
Yeah, very interesting.
And so we don't really have a conversation about that. Now,
May I just interrupt just to say that you've written a very good piece that's up now, I believe, in the Root about the use of terms like Chiraq and war zone and stuff, which I thought was really good and a really constructive contribution to this discussion. But it's like it's hard to make that argument at this point. The temperature is so high.
But it's not a war. I mean, we have to really think about the language that we are using. We are not Iraq. We are not occupied by another country or another government. And I think that residents start, we become what we think we are. There is this sense of fear. And I'm not saying people shouldn't be cautious. And I know that there's certain neighborhoods or blocks that are hotter than others. But so if you want to call this a war, so then who's the enemy? And how do people treat others in war? So, and then we hear these things every so many years. Oh, the National Guard should come in. That is like the absolute worst thing that could happen. We do not want to live in a police state. So we already have all this disinvestment in these communities. So let's bring in troops and let's bring in tanks. That's not what this city is. And we also have to look at, and when I have these conversations, it comes off as sounding insensitive, right? Because Chicago is not the murder capital of the world, of the country, of even the Midwest. Mm-hmm. How do you say that to someone who experienced gun violence? How do you say that to someone when people don't want to look at stats? They don't want to look at what Chicago looks like. It's this emotion, and the media is feeding into this emotion, and it is sexier and easier to do these counts. Mm-hmm. Than it is to talk about the issues that are happening in these communities. The most violent areas have a lot in common. Foreclosures, vacant property, food deserts, high poverty, all the worst outcomes that you can have.
Apart from violence.
Right. Now, on top of that, there are good things happening in these communities. And then we tend to write off a place like Inglewood or Roseland in this one broad stroke, when again, we're talking about really a group of people who have access to guns who are wreaking havoc on the communities. And finally, to your point about morals, I think that's just an easy way. If people, we look at things from an individualistic perspective. So yeah, should that person have gotten that gun? We can all sit here and make statements or judgments that aren't wrong about people with guns. But if you just try to lob this off individually, you're not looking at it from a holistic perspective. And the other thing, Chicago has historically been a violent city, going back to the days of bootlegging. We have just been more violent than other big cities. And I do think the guns are different now. I don't research doesn't really support that mandatory minimums work, but I don't really have an answer on how to get guns off the street in Chicago. And this is also a nationwide problem. This is not just happening here, and it's not just in big cities with, black and brown men. We see this happening in, rural and suburban enclaves also.
I've heard the gun situation described as like, the gun factor in all of this is like the lit match you're throwing onto dry kindling. So there's all this circumstances, and you throw guns into the mix and it explodes. People are still getting stabbed to death. I was out to dinner a few weeks ago and saw someone at Argyle Avenue hit with a baseball bat right on the sidewalk outside the restaurant. I saw it happen. So the point is that there are all different kinds of violence, and obviously guns are immediately destructive in a way that other weapons aren't. But the thing that's missing, I think, from this whole discussion, while I think in one way it's a strange form of progress if we consider all of these lives and all of these injuries to be significant enough to write about them. That is a strange form of progress. Even 15 years ago, there would be a little tiny blurb, if anything, about some of this stuff. But I think the main problem is we haven't really done enough work to find out why people are involved in violence. There's people go in and they talk to the victims' families, which I think is important. But what about the offenders and their families? Like what is going on? We all have our theories. There's obviously something happening that's a combination of all the factors Natalie just talked about, and probably some others. There are serious mental health issues that people have, and at a certain point in time, people have decided that the only way they know how to solve their problems or to assert their manhood is to pick up a gun. And I'm not, we can sit here and place judgment on it, but it isn't happening in a vacuum. It's not random. I mean, this is happening over and over again. And so it's like, I think we haven't really looked at why it's happening and we haven't talked to people who have been offenders. We haven't asked them how they got there. Some people have tried. I mean, obviously, I'm not saying nobody has, but I think fundamentally that is what's missing from this equation, is really looking closely exactly at why this keeps happening over and over again. We know it in the community level, but individually, what has brought a person to the point where that is the best option? Because a lot of stuff isn't about gangs, it's about somebody messing with somebody else's woman,
money, woman,
dice games, I mean, whatever, it's just everyday problems.
And you also both make a very good point that a lot of this is tied up in the history of Chicago, because that's the blood that Chicago was born in. I mean, buckets of blood, right? The levee. I mean, Chicago has always been a violent town that settles its disputes in a very visceral way. We have apparently run out of time, I'm sorry to say.
I don't know how that happened.
and again, these topics are really you just scratch the surface, and that's one of the frustrations of a half-hour program is that you just sort of get started, and then it's time to go. And it's time to go. So, Natalie Moore, thank you so much. I always love having you on the show, and I hope you'll be back. In fact, we're going to talk about getting you guys back again to just pick this conversation up, and then we'll splice the two tapes together. Natalie Moore, WBEZ, and of course Mick Dumke from The Reader. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can see us anytime right here, but you can also, at your convenience, because it's all about you, you go to this address and you can watch the show anytime you want. We'll be back next week with another show. I promise. Somehow or other we'll do it. And you can also subscribe to us on iTunes. I'm Ken Davis. See you next week. Bye.